Hello, and thank you once again for joining me. There's some things I want to talk to you about because I've noticed a trend in things that are going on today and things that have happened in the past. Right now, we are at a pretty interesting point in world relations with North Korea. Now, we're of the opinion, we meaning the United States, that we cannot tolerate on the world stage a nuclear-armed North Korea, which is what we have right now, a nuclear-armed North Korea. But it seems to me that the American people won't tolerate another war. We're tired of war. We've been in war for 20 years. And it would take something drastic to get the people behind a war. Well, that's what I want to talk to you about. See, it's not the first time we've been in this position. Back in 1964 or 63, I can't remember which, we had some problems with Cuba. Now, I'm not talking about the Cuban Missile thing. I'm talking about right before that. Right when Fidel Castro took over and made Cuba a communist country. Again, we said that the world stage would not tolerate Cuba as a communist nation, especially a communist nation 100 miles from the United States. I mean, that's what they were really thinking. And they wanted to invade Cuba, but the American people would not get behind an invasion of Cuba. Kind of like the situation we're in with North Korea. Nobody wants to get behind an invasion or a land attack or any kind of military action against North Korea because of the damage that it could cause to other countries. And the simple fact that we're tired of war. What we view as an unnecessary war. Well, when this was brought up in the 60s, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States drafted a plan. It was called Operation Northwoods. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. I'll briefly go into detail of what it's about, but if you want to check for yourselves, the documents are available from the National Archives website. So, here we are, 1963. I'm going to say that's what it was, because I think that's what it was. Cuba's just become a communist nation under Fidel Castro, and the United States wants to invade and install somebody more friendly to us. Well, the American people just won't get behind that. Not only that, Cuba was allying themselves with the Soviet Union, and a preemptive strike on Cuba is going to incur the wrath of the Soviets, and that's not something we wanted. Kind of like today. If we were to strike North Korea preemptively, China has already said they would come to North Korea's aid with military. And we don't want to get in a military conflict with North Korea and China. We did that once. It didn't work out well. Ask any Korean War veteran. And yes, it was a war. I don't care what anyone says. So, back in the 60s, Operation Northwoods was a plan developed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to encourage the American people to get behind a war with Cuba. Now remember, what I'm about to tell you was drafted up, dreamed up, and presented as a viable plan of action by the United States government. It was 3 separate phases. Right, the first phase of Operation Northwoods was to stage an attack on the naval station at Guantanamo Bay. This would include firing mortars into the station itself, into the naval base, and sinking a Navy ship in the harbor. And this would be done, and this is the exact wording, evidence would be manufactured to support that it was done by militants from Cuba, which in actuality it would be perpetrated by our government, or people paid by our government. And that we were going to do that so there would be a justifiable reason to go to war with Cuba. Okay? Now, this went on to phase 2. If that didn't work, phase 2. Before I talk about phase 2, there was another plan that was kind of a sideline. It was called Operation Dirty Trick. At the time, I think it was the Mercury space shots, not the moon shot, but the orbiting shot, where we sent a man in orbit. If that had failed, and the rocket exploded or something or whatever, they were going to manufacture evidence that it was caused by Cuba and use that as an excuse to go to war. But of course it didn't fail. But anyway, that was acceptable to them as well. But that would have been an accident had it failed. What they were talking about was deliberately doing these things and blaming it on Cuba, just an excuse to go to war. Okay, so phase 2. If attacking Guantanamo Bay Naval Station didn't work, they were going to do this. They were going to instigate terrorist attacks, bomb attacks, around the area of Miami, Florida, and manufacture evidence that it was carried out by pro-Castro Cuban refugees that were in Florida. And that doing this would inspire the rest of the country to get behind an invasion of Cuba, a war with Cuba. Now, this is our government talking about doing this to our citizens. And this was classified. It became declassified a few years ago, and like I said, you can go to the National Archives website and read the documents. But this is what they were willing to do to justify a war that they thought they had to fight. And today we're in a lot of the same position that we were in then. And there's a lot of parallels to the rhetoric being spoken now and what was being spoken then. Now remember, this was in the mid-60s. I mean, things were not... what's the right word? Things were much more... I don't want to say calm, but things like this were a lot less acceptable then than they would be now. I mean, it's completely unacceptable now to think that our government would do something like this to us. But then, if it had gotten out, there would have been another civil war. I mean, to think that your own government would do this just as an excuse to go to war. But it was on the table. It was an option that was on the table. Now, if these bomb attacks didn't work, they go on to phase 3, which is really probably the most sinister part of their plan. And again, you can draw a lot of parallels with things that have happened today, but this is what they plan to do. Their plan was to take a U.S. Air Force F-86 fighter, a Saberjet, what it was called, and to repaint it and make some minor cosmetic changes to it so that it would resemble a MiG-15, which is what the Cuban Air Force was using as their fighter jet. So they were going to use this F-86 dressed up to look like a Cuban MiG-15 and shoot down a commercial airliner. Let that sink in for a second. They were going to shoot down a commercial airliner with an American fighter jet dressed up to look like a Cuban fighter so they could blame it on Cuba. And they even went so far as to suggest that it be a plane load of college students coming back from vacation. Whatever, any excuse for a commercial aircraft filled with American citizens to be traveling in or near Cuba's airspace. They were going to shoot it down. Now, I don't know why this didn't spark more outrage when these documents were declassified. You know, maybe they were just quietly declassified so, nobody would get the hint of what was going on. Now, this plan was presented to President Kennedy, and President Kennedy said, absolutely not. You're not going to do this to our own citizens. So it never happened. But my point is, they were willing to do it. They were willing and able. They were going to have the CIA or someone else do these things, which in of itself is illegal because the CIA is not allowed to operate within the continental U.S. Or they're not supposed to anyway. I mean, they are the CIA, so. But it makes you wonder, what exactly are they willing to do now if the American people won't get behind a war with North Korea? I mean, just a couple of days ago, North Korea tested a hydrogen bomb, a two-stage fission-fusion bomb, with a yield anywhere between 120 and 200 kilotons. If you don't know what that means, the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima with 16 kilotons. So this is magnitudes more powerful than that. This is a thermonuclear weapon. Now, when we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, it killed 60,000 people instantly. And that was a very crude bomb design. What North Korea has is on par with the weapons that we have now. Maybe not as technologically sophisticated, but with the same destructive power. If they were to drop a 120 kiloton nuclear weapon on, say, New York, millions of people would die. Millions. Or even Seoul, South Korea. That's one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Millions of people would die from one weapon. But they're not gunning for Seoul. They don't hate Seoul. They don't teach their children nursery rhymes about South Koreans, how to hate South Koreans. They teach them how to hate Americans. So, what's our government willing to do? Right now, our official nuclear policy has been changed. During the Clinton administration, it was a fire on warning. If we saw an enemy nation launching missiles at us, as soon as we heard about it, we would fire some back. But that's been changed. Now, our policy is to withstand an initial attack before retaliating. That was changed during the Clinton administration. Now, the current president could change it back to fire on warning, if he wanted to. But is he going to? Or do they want to allow an attack to take place to get the American people behind a war? Or worse yet, are they going to perpetrate an attack and blame it on North Korea to get the American people behind a war? They've suggested it before. They are capable of it. I mean, look at 9/11. If that hadn't happened, the American people would have never been behind the invasion of Iraq. Now, I'm not going to talk about 9/11, okay? That's something for another time. I'm just using that event as an example. Because if that hadn't happened, and the president had suggested invading Iraq, nobody would have been behind it. But yet that one event changed everything. So are they willing to allow a catastrophic event to happen just for the sole purpose of wiping North Korea off the face of the map? Or willing to perpetrate it themselves? If you ask me, one's just as bad as the other. Either you do it yourself, or you know it's going to happen and you stand by and let it. Either way, you're just as guilty. You're just as liable. But the one thing they haven't considered is any type of nuclear war will change everything forever. China's not going to stand by and let us nuke their neighbor. Neither is Russia. Because they're going to get the fallout. They're going to get the refugees. They're going to be mad at us. Even if North Korea strikes us first, they're probably not going to stand idly by. Now, like I said, China's already said, if we make a move on North Korea without provocation, and they don't consider everything Kim Jong-un is saying to be provocation. Okay, they want actual military action from North Korea against the United States first. So if that doesn't happen and we move on them, China comes to North Korea's aid. And now we're fighting North Korea and China, and maybe Russia. Okay, so then we got to pull our allies into it. South Korea, Japan. Then what do we have? A world war. The Third World War. Now, the North Korean dictator will do anything he can to maintain his dynasty and to stay in power. And that includes using nuclear weapons. Now, you'd say he'd have to be a madman to fire a nuke at the United States. Well, I think he is a madman. I think he's got a very narrow view of the world and what's going on around him. And I think if anybody's capable of doing that, it's him. So keep your eye on things. And let's hope for the best. I'm just afraid that it'll turn out to be the worst. But you never know. We've been close to war before and averted it. So maybe this will happen this time. Maybe the man will come to his senses. I don't know. Only time will tell. But I do know that there's not much time left. So if you're a praying person, you might want to pray. If you're not, you might want to start. Because right now, we need all the help we can get. But, as usual, you be the judge. I'm just here to give you my opinion, and I appreciate you listening to it. Questions, comments, rude remarks? Hit me up, tinfoilhat712 at gmail.com. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.